Welcome to the Hernia Gods Podcast. This is your mere mortal host, Luke Elms. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on this podcast belong solely to the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy, position, or opinions of Orlando Health or any of our employers. And now, without further ado, let's talk hernias. All right, hello and welcome to another episode of the Hernia Gods Podcast. This is your mere mortal host, Luke Elms. Today, I am very pleased to be joined by Dr. Edward Felix. Thank you so much for joining us, sir.
It's my honor. I'm just surprised you still want to have an old retired guy like me around.
Well, I was going to say, it's your 10 commandments, it's one of the main pimp questions I ask my residents. And so whenever I told one of the residents I was working with recently that we were having a conversation, his mind was blown. So you're still very relevant, at least around these parts of the woods.
Well, thank you. And I'll tell you how we got to 10 somewhere in this podcast, because that's a kind of funny story.
Absolutely. Well, I'd love to start just by hearing, a little bit about, who you are, where you come from, and kind of your career.
Yeah, I was born in Chicago and went to school there, then went off to the University of Michigan, and I'll hold up my bleed blue sweatshirt, because once you go to Michigan, you bleed blue for the rest of your life. So, and that's how I spend my Saturdays, is watching Michigan football. So, but went off to Michigan for undergrad. And then because I was paying for my own medical school, I went back to Chicago and picked the school that gave me a full scholarship, which was the University of Illinois, and went there for 4 years. Interestingly enough, I went to medical school with the idea of becoming a psychiatrist and not a surgeon. And I matched in a psychiatry residency with my ex-roommate. We both matched. And 3 days before the residency was supposed to start, I said, "This is insane. I cannot be a psychiatrist." I had worked as an OR tech at Rush St. Luke's, which was part of our system back then, before it became its own med school. And I said, "I want to be a surgeon. This is crazy. I don't want to be a psychiatrist." So I went up to Professor Neus's office, and I knew him from the AOA Society. And I said, "What am I to do? I'm matched to psychiatry and I want to be a surgeon." And he said, "Fine, I'll make you a spot." And he actually did. He added me on because he knew me from the society. He knew my credentials. He added me on, and I became a surgeon under him. And then I was very, very fortunate during that training. I met someone named Tapas Dasgupta, who's a famous surgical oncologist, who took me under his wing. Got me a position at the NIH for 2 years, which was unusual for a Midwestern kid, and did that instead of going to Vietnam, which was somewhat safer than Vietnam, but not quite. But spent 2 years in D.C., went back, finished my residency at the University of Illinois under Nehus, stayed there as a prof for a couple of years, ran the Cook County Oncology Unit, actually, and then went to California to do private practice. I got tired of academics. And the interesting thing, and I've said this before, is before I left, Professor Neus said to me that I could do something beyond private practice. He said there was a guy named McVeigh, who I'm sure you know who that is, who was nothing but a Midwestern surgeon who became very famous and very academically oriented. And he said that to me, and I was in his office, and I was being very polite. And I said, basically, okay, Dr. Neus, you're probably right. And I knew at the time that was never going to happen. And I went off to California, landed in Fresno. I don't know if you know anything about Fresno, but it's sort of like your hometown in Oklahoma. Yeah. Fresno is a small town. I did surgical onc there for 10 years. And then someone walked into my office one day. I was covering for my partners. And I did general surgery, but not that much. And I did vascular and general. And she said, "I saw something on TV last night, and you're supposed to take out my gallbladder. Can you do it the way they did on TV?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" She says, "Yeah, these guys did it with these little sticks and little incisions." And I looked at her and said, "Come on." So I ran home. I turned on CNN, and there's my buddy Eddie Riddick, who later became close friends with me, doing the first choles, supposedly the first choles. And he really wasn't. McKernan really was. And I said, if I was to do that, I bet you I could be quite successful. And so I came back to Fresno, met up with Joe Peatland. I don't know if you know that name, but Joe taught me what to do. And then that was the beginning of a new career. And probably I did somewhere in the first year around 500 to 1,000 gallbladders. Because I was if you know the history of lap chole at all, very few people accepted it. Nobody accepted it at the academic institutions. And so I took off with it and was doing them like crazy. Ended up teaching with the guys from Cedars down in LA. We ran courses and taught. And I had done basically a couple thousand gallbladders. And then I heard about a guy named Leonard Schultz, which you don't know that name, but Leonard Schultz was a guy in Minnesota who was trying to figure out how to do hernias laparoscopically. And I said, I bet you I could do that because Nihus taught us how to do posterior hernia repairs open. And so I went off and met up with a couple of people and then came back to California and we gathered some patients, my partner and I, and we told them, well, we know how to do this posteriorly open, and we're going to do it with laparoscopic instruments. And the patients said, "Are you sure?" And we said, "Yeah, don't worry about it." We had no rules or anything, and I found a surgery center that would let me do it, and that's how it all started. But the difference, and here's the key difference, is that when I did all the choles, I didn't keep any records on a computer. So I ran out and bought a Dell computer. My first computer cost me, and I still remember, cost me $7,000 for that Dell computer. I should have bought Dell stock because it would have been $7,000 would have been worth several million. But instead, I bought the computer, and I kept a database, and that was the beginning of lap hernia for me. And we collected, I think it was the first 500 cases I collected. I presented at the American College of Surgeons. And then someone said to me, "Well, you can't be doing all those hernias. You're not a hernia center." And I said, "Oh, that makes sense." So I came back to California after being in Chicago for the meeting. I said to my partner, "We're now the Center for Hernia Repair in Fresno, California."
All that.
And I just started collecting data and experimenting and refining the technique, and the rest was history. We did, I did somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 lap hernias and collected the data and started writing papers and became what Nihus predicted was academically oriented.
Yeah,
so that went on for a number of years. And if I'm not being too winded, I got bored. So I decided I needed something more complicated. So because I was doing other minimally invasive procedures, so I started doing bariatrics then, in addition to hernia, and did that for another 10 years. And that's for another podcast, but it did a lot of writing, and that's how it all came about with the lap hernia.
How did you do the first few
things?
What was your technique on the first few? What was like the approach?
Yeah, it was interesting. If you look at our original papers, Dr. Nihus had developed something he called the buttress technique for the open posterior repair, and so I came up with a slit around there. But then I decided that slit was potentially a place where you could herniate through. So I put another small patch over the slit and called it a double buttress after Nihus because I knew it would make him happy. Called it the double buttress technique. And I did somewhere around 100 plus cases of those, and it was way too much mesh, but I can tell you it was bulletproof. That thing almost, I think out of the first 100 I had one documented recurrence. I mean, there's just nowhere it was going to recur, but it was too much mesh. And that shifted you just to eventually a non-slitted mesh. And I did probably 500 to 1,000 of those. And then a company called Origin, I don't know if you know about them. Origin was the company with Fred Mall, who actually invented the intuitive computer robot. Fred Mall had this company called Origin, and he was trying to develop an extraperitoneal technique. And he and his buddies flew down to Fresno because they heard I was doing all these cases, and they couldn't believe some little old guy was doing that in Fresno. And he said, "Would you like to do this?" And I had already kind of run out of things to write about, very honestly, with a posterior just tap approach. And so I said, "Okay, we'll see what we can do." And then I started doing extraperitoneal or TEP, and named it the TEP, TEP, because I thought it sounded cool with tap. That's how the name TEP came about. Very honestly, it was some people had named it something else, but I called it TEP. And so then switched over when I saw the advantages of the TEP approach, switched over to a TEP repair, and then slowly modified it through the years. And that's, we can talk more about that, but basically switched and felt that the TEP, for most cases, not all, but most cases, is a better approach than a tap approach because you don't violate the peritoneal cavity. And then of interest is Nihus. You have to understand, he's really, but with Stoppa, the father of a posterior repair. But he thought laparoscopy was crazy. He was very much against laparoscopic hernia repair. And in fact, he had attacked once Bob Fitzgibbons, who's another from Creighton, about it, and he was very unhappy. So a debate was set up at the American College of Surgeons. I had a debate, Dr. Nihus, on laparoscopic hernia repair versus open. And so I presented the TEP to him, and at that meeting, he was won over and started supporting because he felt there was no reason you should violate the peritoneal cavity. So that's enough of the history.
So after you worked out your technique on the TEP, was that your standard approach moving forward?
Yeah, the TEP was a standard approach, except for if someone had an incarcerated hernia that I couldn't reduce, I think TAP's a better approach. If you have a female and you don't know the etiology, if the pain is due to the hernia or something else, you want to do a TAP. And if someone's had a previous posterior mesh repair, I've written some papers that I think TAP's a better approach. I don't like to go back TEP. There are surgeons who will go back TEP on a recurrent hernia with a posterior mesh, and I think that the risk is greater, and I've debated that. I think the risk is greater than the value for that. So those are the cases that I would do a TAP. And now that robotics has come about, it's kind of flip-flopped, but everybody's doing our TAPs. But there are a few people, and I give them credit, and Flavio Malcher and a few others who have come up with a robotic TEP. And so I think it's more difficult, but I think that will become the approach because you can combine the hernia repair with a ETEP ventral hernia repair all as one. So I think that's going to gather steam.
Yeah, I've done a few of those. They work well. You have to make sure that you get I think it's for me, something I was aware of prior to going in there and doing those was always thinking, don't skimp on the dissection of the inguinal hernia, because I think that's just like the natural tendency is to be like, that's, but really getting everything back like you normally would and just making sure that you do a good quality repair down there too. But like the patients I've done that on, boy, they've been really pleased.
Yeah, I think my buddy Jorge has been the one who's kind of brought that, with some others to the forefront. But I think if you can do that with a ventral, there's no reason you can't do that just as a primary robotic repair if you're into robotics. That's a whole nother debate, whether robotics is better. And I've kind of swung around, and we can go into that a little bit, but I've debated your buddy Conrad multiple times. We had a fun time because we're very best friends of making fun of each other. But I think it's swinging to robotics, but that's okay. As long as it's done minimally invasive. And I think if you look at the numbers now, there are more hernias done minimally invasively if you add robotic and laparoscopic than open now. And so I think that it only took 30 years that to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I started my career doing actually doing TEPS. And that was kind of how I was trained to do the minimally invasive. But really, honestly, when I came out of my training, I always felt and still do that I needed to be able to do everything that I do laparoscopically or robotically open. Because ultimately, if you get in a situation where you have to convert and do a different approach, you got to be well skilled. And so I had a partner who was in his mid 70s, and he did all open. And so I actually took some cues from him and really got comfortable doing some of the open ones. And at that time, I was also doing a lot. My whole career, I've got a lot of inguinal scrotals, and I don't really know why. That's just what shows up. And so I was at that point, I wasn't doing robotics. And I wasn't approaching those minimally invasive. I was not comfortable enough in that technique. But then when I switched over to robotics, I still will occasionally do a laparoscopic, but mostly now that's just what works for me. And I've definitely noted that even my robotic approach has become much more refined. I think the reps really make a difference for me.
Yeah, it's repetition over and over. I told someone the other day, I was talking to a surgeon, one of the bariatric surgeons, and what's the difference between an expert and a novice? And the difference is an expert has made all the mistakes already, and so they have that to go back on and say, well, I know, don't want to do that, or I know how to fix that. And that's partly, you talked about the 10 Commandments. That's partly how the 10 Commandments came about. Actually, in my original lecture is something that was the impetus for it. Actually.
Yeah, that was actually my next question, which is, you can learn lessons or come up with techniques, but really life kind of teaches you lessons. And some of those lessons are learned through success and repeating and repetitive success. And some of them come from failures. The 10 Commandments, were those from success or failure mostly?
Well, I can honestly, it's a combination. They came. I was at a meeting watching one of the national meetings, and I was watching some videos as you walk around the booths, the commercial booths, not the meeting, but the commercial booths. And I was watching these people operate, especially in the early days of robotics, and I was seeing stuff that just didn't make sense. I mean, I had been doing this now. Started doing lap hernia in what was it? In 1991 was the year I think I started doing lap hernia. And I started doing choles in 90, and about late 90s, early 91 started doing lap hernia. And we had years and years of experience of, as you say, seeing what worked and didn't work. And I was watching these guys do stuff that we had abandoned 20 years ago, that this is not what you should do. And we had written about it. And I said, this is crazy. There's certain steps that you need to do. So I had to give a lecture actually at one of the ski meetings from Columbia. And I came up with this idea. I'm going to present the steps of what you're supposed to be doing to correct this from our experience, and not not the errors, but what you have to do in each step to try and prevent these errors that I was seeing, these crazy things that people were reinventing. And I came up with 9 rules. Okay, and I said, you get 9. These are. And someone said to me, "What are those? Are your commandments?" I said, "Yeah, these are my commandments." I said, "Well, if you have commandments, you have to have 10, right?"
Yeah.
I mean, everybody knows that. It doesn't matter whether you're Jewish like I am or Christian. There's 10 commandments. There's not 9. So I was at a meeting, and I said, "Okay, I got the idea. The 10th commandment is no matter how you do this repair, TEP, TAP, ETAP, robotics, you have to follow the first 9." Okay. So that's actually the 10th commandment.
That's funny. Do you think the 10th commandment knows that it was an afterthought I just imagine like the 10 Commandments, like children. This one like doesn't realize it's like, was the mistake.
Okay, if you come, I'm going to show a video that I've made and gotten partly from somebody else, but a video at this year's coming up in August at the American Hernia Society. I'm going to start out my session with a video that shows how the 10 Commandments came about. So
I'd love
you
to
have
see
to.
it.
I'm not going to give it away here. I've shown it before, but you'll have to come to that meeting to see that. So I don't know. I think the 10th commandment doesn't care
Okay.
what's going on, but then what happened after I did these 10 commandments and gave the lecture a few times, Jorge Dias, who's I've known now since he attended one of my lectures way back when, in the bad days. We become friends, and he said, we should publish this. And I said, who wants to listen to this garbage? And so he and I got together, and he started it, and then we refined it into the 9 steps of the critical view, which actually came from Brian Jacobs, the International Hernia Society collaboration. So we took those 9 steps and defined them, and then he sent it off to the Annals of Surgery, and lo and behold, it became the most downloaded paper from the Annals of Surgery, almost in the history of the Annals of Surgery. It has become, we never dreamed of it, but it's become extremely popular because, as you say, it's a way for people learning to do it, how to do it, and what they have to do to complete it. And it's also a way that some people have told me that when they get done, they went, "Ooh, I forgot step 6. I didn't take out the lipoma, or I didn't do this." So it's just a way. It's sort of like a pilot who has to go through the checklist, and so I think that's why it became popular. Then there's been one variation. My friends in Brazil, Malcher and his Brazilian buddies, who still off in Brazil, came to me, and they wanted to combine their approach with the steps, and we wrote a paper on that. And what that paper shows is that you don't have to start like we do on the medial side. You can start from lateral to medial, and you can vary the approach by the zones and so on. So it's become quite popular. It's been nice for me in my old age. It's been like a rebirth of my interest in hernia.
Yeah.
So it's been fun.
It's like you have this like it for, in the hernia world, it's probably one of the most questioned topics for residents. I know it is in my OR, so it's always funny. Everybody's like, he's going to ask us about those 10 commandments. But we, I think that the hernias, it's nice because having those in your back pocket, despite the crazy anatomy that some of these people come in with from their hernias, and if you can kind of stick to accomplishing those set goals, you can kind of get there. And it's whenever you end up you can watch people do dissections, and they go, you just kind of can get lost. And I know that's the way I was when I first started. You get into those big inguinal scrolls, and you're just kind of like, where am I? Like, what is happening? But over time, following those and kind of getting step-by-step approach, it makes it much, much more manageable than if you're just like, I just need to open the peritoneum and get the sac back, and that's just a very broad approach. But one of the things I've seen a lot in my just watching other surgeons and through training and things is a lot of people when they're doing TEPs specifically, I think I've seen a lot of people really not get nearly the dissection plane that you really talk about. And also I think there's a tendency to use much smaller pieces of mesh because and I think that's been one of my observations, and that's one of the reasons I switched over, is I felt like I wasn't getting as good of a dissection plane just because I hadn't done as many.
Yeah, that's exactly one of the things that we came to, and why we wrote this is one of the things we saw at the college meeting, is that people were doing tiny little dissections and then throwing in this micro mesh. And the important thing to understand is whether you do a TAP or a TEP, the finished product or the critical view is the same. I don't know if you know any literature, but when I was a big reader of existentialism, and what I feel, and I've written about, is that the commandments or the steps, it's not the final view. It's the steps and the approach to get to the view. In existentialism, what you believe in is it's the journey that's important.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what's important in hernia repair, or in other things too. Whether you're doing bariatrics, it's not just, it's that journey of how you get there. And you're exactly right. You see these people putting in these postage stamp stuffs, and some of my best talks have been going on the internet and pirating people's what they think are great videos.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I have one lecture that's nothing but pirated videos from the literature, from the YouTube,
Mm-hmm.
and use those to show this is what you're not supposed to do.
Yeah.
But yet the guy who put it up there, he thought it was the best thing in the whole world. It was sliced bread. It was great, man.
Yeah, that's why I'll never see my videos online.
Well, I'll watch for them, but it is interesting. If you want to find some bad stuff to show your residents, just go online and sort through people's what they think is the right approach, or they come up with crazy things. But
Yeah.
especially for
I went in to do a left-sided primary hernia, and the guy told me it looked like he had a previous lap tap. And I go in there, and so it was a straightforward case, so I didn't get pre-op imaging. But I get in and look down in the right pelvis, and there looks like it was a piece of old, I don't know, it was an old coated mesh that somebody had not dissected the peritoneum at all. They'd taken basically like an IPOM mesh, stuck it down in the right pelvis, and taken a metal tacker and gone completely circumferentially. So like on either side of the iliac vessels, there's two metal tacks sticking, like one to the psoas, and it didn't recur at all. I was in there with the resident. I said, don't ever do this, but it seems to have worked. The guy didn't have any pals. Like 99% of the time, that's going to be a problem. This one got away with it, but don't do that.
That was an original approach. If you know hernia history, which I unfortunately know too much about now from my experience, is that was one of the original approaches. That was the approach of Bob Fitzgibbons to do an onlay mesh, and the only person that sort of did that, but did it correctly, was a guy named Morris Franklin. Do you know Morris Franklin's name?
I do not.
If not, Morris unfortunately has passed away. But you should Google Dr. Morris Franklin from San Antonio, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
He is the father. The IPON Plus for ventral hernias.
Mm-hmm.
He is the father of that long before it was accepted. Mm-hmm. He's the father of laparoscopic colon surgery. Mm-hmm. I mean, he was an amazing guy, but he would do an approach where it was sort of an IPOM for the inguinal, but he would actually dissect everything out and then put it on. So it was a hybrid kind of approach that some of us have to do when there isn't enough peritoneum, but that's what he would do.
Yeah.
But what you're describing is an old approach.
Yeah, it was funny though, because the residents were like, "What is that?" And I was like, "Well, that's not something we do anymore." But yeah, it's hard to. I mean, for this patient, it worked, I guess. But yeah, so you're talking about, you went through a period of time where it was gallbladders, and then it was hernias, and it sounds like and then from our discussions, you also moved into the bariatric world, and we're really kind of on the forefront of all three as pushing the boundaries. And as you said before, it's taken only 30 years to get kind of widespread acceptance to where people are coming back and saying, like, this guy had it and he knows it, and that he was right. During that period of time, is there you're talking about existentialism? Is there kind of a early in that journey? Were you ever sitting there going, did you ever feel like you were under siege? I guess is my question, or how does that strike you?
Yeah, I was more than under siege. There's a famous lecture that I gave at the American College of Surgeons. It's only famous now. It wasn't famous then. Mm-hmm. But I got up there and presented, X number of cases to this huge auditorium, and people basically from the audience were swearing at me and said, "Oh, this is stupid. You can't be doing this laparoscopically." And I had just bought a baseball hat, and I can't remember what city we were in, but I bought a baseball hat from the local team or whatever it was, and I was in a bag, sitting on the floor, and I'm from Chicago, and we got a lot of gangsters in Chicago, right? So here I am at a national meeting, sitting up there on the podium giving this lecture, uh, and so I reach down to the bag, I pull out my baseball hat, I put it on backwards, and said, "Okay, here's the truth. You just believe it or not." And the person sitting in the audience that got stimulated by that was Jorge Dias.
Uh-huh.
And that's how we became friends to this day. As he came up to me afterwards and said, "You're probably right. I should, start doing that," and took off with it. But yeah, no, people threw rotten tomatoes at me for years. The most gratifying thing I can say is something recent that's happened. The European Hernia Society, they have all their rules and their what they say is proper to do and so on from thousands of cases. They have recently come out and said, one, that the preferred technique for hernia is laparoscopic, whether it's bilateral or unilateral. That's something I said 30 years ago, and no one believed me. They tried to say you could only do laparoscopic for bilateral hernias.
Right.
And I said, well, that makes no sense, because if you can't do it on one side successfully, how the hell are you going to learn to do it on two sides?
Right.
And then they said, oh, you can only do it for recurrent hernias. That was the second thing that they originally said. There's no reason you should do them open. And if you want to do a laparoscopic, it should be for a recurrent hernia if it's unilateral. And then again, I said that made even less sense, because if you couldn't figure out how to do a primary hernia, how the hell are you going to learn to do a recurrent hernia?
Right.
Well, the European Society, and then the final one was, I said women should have laparoscopic repairs because of the incidence of femoral hernias, even when they present with an indirect and so on. And so finally, the European Society in their rules this year have come out and said, all those things that I said almost 30 years ago are true. And that's why I say I should be bitter, but I'm just happy, in my old age. Okay, I'm vindicated. I was right. It's like with you when your wife finally admits, yeah, you were right. Doesn't happen often.
I've never
Not
experienced
often.
that.
Well, yeah, I'm married 48 years, so it happens. Son, maybe in 46th year. Finally.
Yeah, I'm only 20 years in, so maybe I'll get there eventually.
No, you got a ways to go before they'll admit. As my youngest son, who's now a surgery resident, I told him he's just got married, and I said, there's you don't ever want to win an argument, because if you lose the argument, they're happy. And if you happen to win the argument, your wife will never forget that. And she'll remember 10 years later and say, you my said.
Wife she's one of the most competitive people I've ever met. And she'll admit this. We used to play right when we first were dating. We were dating when shortly before turning 18. And so we were playing games, like Risk and Rummy and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And we would always play a game until the first time I beat her, and then it was a new game. She doesn't handle it well.
Yeah, well, that's like my wife and I play backgammon together, and we both learned at the same time. But I was better than she was. It's my personality, and I was winning all the time. And then I realized I got to let her win sometime, because if I don't, she's not going to keep playing.
Yeah,
but now she's very good. She's figured out the different ways, and what you have to do and the risk. So now it's a competitive game, and I don't let her win; she wins. But yeah, you got to keep them in the game. It's like your kids. If you're playing basketball or baseball, you got to let them once in a while feel like they're succeeding and beating you.
Man, my son, he's 8, and he decided he wanted to do chess camp. He'd never played before, and he went to chess camp this past summer. And he comes home like the very first day, he's like, Dad, I want to play you in chess. I was like, okay. And so he sits down and I'm like looking at my phone, like not paying attention, like 3 moves in, like takes my queen. I was like, okay, like put down the phone, like, and then he proceeds to just like stomp my wife at chess like over and over again. And there was and so we've been humbled by our own child. But that's, if you're going to be humbled by somebody, that's a rewarding one to be humbled by.
Yeah, my oldest son, who's now in his 40s, he is of the era when computer sports first came out, and so he was about 8-year-old, 9-year-old, something like that, and it was Larry Bird versus Magic Johnson basketball. Okay, and we're playing, and he knows nothing about basketball at this age. And every time I take the ball out, he would steal it because he was so good with the joysticks or computer or whatever it was at the time. And it drove me crazy. And finally I said, I can't play with you anymore because you won't let me get the ball down the court. Yeah. But yeah, your kids are the best thing. So yeah. And to me, and I'm sure you, the most important thing is your family. So your boys or your daughters or whoever kids you have, you live for them after a while. So
yeah, I've got one of each. Obviously you were a very high volume surgeon, had your hands in a lot of academics as that part of your career. And I'm sure you traveled a lot with that aspect of your career. How did you manage to maintain that connection with your family and your relationships?
Well, I don't know if I did that great a job with some of the boys. I have 3 sons. One of them, unfortunately, has passed away. My middle son passed away from a brain tumor at 32. And he and I travel. When I was home, I would be with him. He was on a traveling soccer team, so we bonded over that. We would travel all over California and some outside California playing soccer. So I bonded with him. My older son, I wasn't around that much. Yeah. And my youngest son, who's now finished medical school and is figuring out what he's going to be doing, he always complains. He says, "You were never home." But now that he's a first-year surgery resident, he calls me every day and he's telling me about the patients and what would I do, and so on. So we're rebonding. Mm-hmm. But I think I traveled way too much from the early 90s until 2020, till COVID. I mean, I was traveling all over the world, and so I was away too much. And the price I'm paying now is my wife says, well, you went so-and-so, now we have to go there together. So now if people are always, because I'm on Facebook a lot, people see our travels. We do a lot of traveling together and as a family much more. But it's a difficult problem. You don't want to forget your kids because they grow up very fast. Before you know it, they don't want anything to do with you for a while, right? But they come back. But let me warn you, they come back. So there's that period in high school and even early college where they want to be independent. Yeah. But for my 2 boys, especially when my middle one passed away, we've become very, very, very close. Mm-hmm. Here's a picture up there of my 3 sons. So all got mustaches now. So. And 2 of them are bald. The 2 that are still with us are going bald like me. But
yeah, me too.
But we're very close. And I think if I can give you one tip, it's don't ignore the kids because as you know, before you know it, they're gone for a while. They come back. Especially, fortunately or unfortunately, COVID was a thing where they came back to live with us for a while. Yeah. So it was a good thing, good and bad. So.
Yeah, it's a really weird time. I'm in my career. My career started very up until I came into practice. My career went almost flawlessly. It was just and then I really stumbled out the gate with my starting in my practice. And so whenever I kind of got things turned around and things started rolling in the right direction, especially here recently, opportunities, they come in bunches. and some success and opportunities breed other opportunities. And so what I'm really struggling with now is kind of determine, I know that I'm a finite a finite being here, at determining when and where to say no. And that's really kind of where the rubber meets the road in our practice. For instance, we're trying to really start to delegate some of the things that previously we were very heavily micromanaging. And that's a whole other side of leadership, is choosing the right people to delegate to, and being okay when they do things maybe not the same way that I would have done them. But I do think that that's kind of where I'm trying to find that balance, because I do think that I'm working too many hours to really hold my kids and my wife and those relationships to the level that I say I want to, but really in practicality, I'm probably not living up to that.
Yeah, it's very tough. And when I was in, for most of my career, I was in private practice until I semi-retired. And what was in 2013, I took a new job where I worked for a hospital to set up a bariatric unit. And in private practice, the number one thing is you can't say no to someone who wants to refer you a patient. Mm-hmm. It's all about one of my partners used to say, he was from Tennessee, and he if I can use the word redneck, he was a redneck. So it's an interesting combination of him and me, little Jewish boy and a redneck from the South together as partners. So it was very interesting. But he used to say it's the 3 A's: availability, affability, and the last A is ability.
Yep.
He said that's how you get your referrals, is if you're available, they refer to you. If you're nice, they refer to you. Mm-hmm. And then they will learn whether your patients do well.
Yeah.
And so that private practice is a little different than academics. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if you know, I have a very good friend who's at Mayo, who I've mentored through the years, who's now moved up, and he's a professor at Mayo Clinic. And what I tell him is that, because he's traveling a lot, and I said, don't ignore your kids. You got two young little kids, a boy and a girl. You got to be there, because they're going to grow up.
Yeah.
And they won't know you. And, my older son still to this day says, I wasn't around enough. But now we're good buddies. We do things together and enjoy each other. And the same thing with my youngest. But you can't get those years back. But it's a tough thing. And the same thing in academics. I mean, the traveling thing is, it's hard to say no, because you enjoy what you're doing. For me, it was teaching. I love teaching. I mean, I've been teaching laparoscopic technique, whether it was hernia or gallbladder, or then bariatrics, adrenalectomy, so on and so forth. That's been more fun. And for my students to become really great it's like your kids.
Yeah.
You really enjoy that more. When you see a resident or one of your people flourish, I won't give you a name, but there's someone who attended two of my things and I taught, who's now quite more famous than I am. And it's great, because that means I must have done something right.
Right.
And succeeded. So teaching's fun.
It is. I was not always the best teacher. I think that I got better after I had kids, actually. And you're right, because there's a weird, it's like a weird parent feel, and much more patient than I used to be, and probably even have that kind of like dad disappointment when things aren't going well, It's a little bit of like, oh, you can do better.
But you're in the era where you have to be nice. See, I'm from the era before me was even worse, but the days of Zollinger and those guys were crazy. Mm-hmm. I mean, I could tell you stories of what they used to do to residents, which was total insanity. You'd be arrested today if you did what they did. But the first half of my career, we weren't nice to residents, and you could get away with almost anything. Now you can't discipline anybody. You have to do it in a nice way and make them feel good and so on. So it's a tough transition for an old guy like me. But some people, one of my nurses I had the same nurses for years, and my nurse would say, "Boy, you've mellowed over the years," and I would just say, "No, I'm exhausted. I haven't
I'm
mellowed.
too tired to be angry.
I can't. It's too much energy to slap them around anymore." But
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting. I think we have, the pendulum's always swinging, right? So you come from the times when stuff was definitely probably not good then, but definitely wouldn't be good now, all the way. And there's probably some happy medium in all of this that makes a little bit more sense. But yeah, there's definitely an art to being to holding people accountable and not being malignant about it. But I think that it's one of those deals that, yeah, it's different. I mean, I try very, very hard not to be the person that's like, back in my day, I would have, because I think that they've got, the truth is our,
they don't want to hear that.
Yeah. Well, and the truth is our residents, like right now, they're actually learning more techniques, per surgery than even I learned. And I've not been out that long, and so, there was, realistically, when they're going to learn how to do a hernia repair in the groin, for instance, they're really learning at this point three different not techniques, but three different modalities that you can fix them with.
Mm-hmm.
I think convincing them that it actually is the same technique, just with a different tool, is probably something that you would agree with. But I think that it's definitely different levels of stress that they have now than we did back then. And I do see some of the residents coming through that are just incredibly skilled.
Yeah, no, and when you talk about that, I think one of the advantages now, and why I've swung in robotics, of my saying robotics is a good thing, is I don't think the results of robotics are any better, and no one's for anything. No one has been able to show that, even though people claim it. When you look at the numbers, the results are basically identical to whether you do it laparoscopic or robotic. I think the advantage to the robotics has been the learning curve, and that's for multiple reasons. And one, there's simulators now, so you can do all this stuff before you ever get to the OR with a simulator. You learn the anatomy. It's sort of like learning to fly a plane from a simulator before you take it up and crash it. And so that's number one. And number two, if you have dual consoles, you can. The hardest thing for me, especially not so much for hernia, but when I was teaching bariatrics, I had a fellowship for 5 years, a certified fellowship. And when I would teach them, I would take them in a certain way. In other words, I would break a gastric bypass down into steps, just like I did with hernia. And so they would start out, they'd have to be able to complete step one efficiently, because I never thought anybody should be on the table more than 2 hours for a gastric bypass. Because I can do one in an hour and a half. They should be able, never more than 2 hours. So I would say, okay, you do step one. When you can do step one and complete that, then you get to do step one and step two, and so on and so forth. Because for a gastric bypass particularly, and even anyone with a hernia, you go in an orderly fashion. So it that allowed them, by the time my fellows would reach 6 months, they could do pretty much a whole procedure. And then the next 6 months was getting their time down to what I thought was great for the patients. And also, I had a technique, as you probably know, as someone who teaches, from the other side of the table or whatever, the assistant, you could actually be doing the case and they don't even know it.
You can ghost them. We call it ghosting them.
You're exposing everything.
Yeah.
So I'll give you a tip. You can do this with your residents. By the time they're competent, you should be assisting them as if you are an imbecile. In other words, you don't move to give them exposure unless they ask for it.
Yeah.
Because one of the things I found when people came to me for my fellowship in minimally invasive surgery, they'd say, "Oh, I've done all these gallbladders and I've done all this." And I said, "Okay, go ahead." And they'd start doing it. And if I wasn't giving them the proper exposure, they didn't know what the hell they were doing.
Right.
And they had finished a residency. Yeah. And I said, what did your attendings do? And they said, "Well, they operated and first assisted me and I did it." I said, "Well, you're going to go out in the real world in another year.
Yeah.
And you're going to look over your shoulder like this. Where's that guy
Yes.
to give you the exposure, whether you're
Yeah.
doing a hernia or you're doing a bypass or whether you're doing adrenalectomy. And so that was what I did as a teacher, is to take them through that and then eventually get it to the point where they had to tell me as the first assistant where to hold the stomach or where to hold the peritoneum if I was doing a hernia. Because when they leave, Luke's not going to be there.
It's baffling. I mean, it happened to me when I came out. You get out there to do your first case, and I can't remember what it was. It wasn't my first case, but I think it was just like a straightforward open umbilical. And I'm like trying to do this, and I'm like sewing in this like hole, and I'm like, what is going on? And I'm like, how is this so hard? I was knocking, and then I realized that like, the scrub's like holding things, because it's not just them not retracting. Half the time they're retracting the wrong way, or like they're running the camera and they're like staring at the wall, and you're like, no, over there. And then you get to the point where you're like, oh, I see. Or the number of times that like somebody's like here, and they just like reach over and like like holding on top of your hand, like operating for you with like your own hand. So you're like, oh, yeah, I didn't actually do that case, did I?
No, I mean, I think that's exactly right, and that's what you have to teach them. It was funny when I would be working with somebody, and they'd be first assisting me, supposedly, and doing a laparoscopic case, and they would try to move the camera. I said, "You don't move. I'll tell you when to move and where to move.
Yeah,
you do not. My own partner would drive me crazy because he thought he could do the case, and I'd go, don't move. That's why robotics is so nice. You're controlling the camera, not somebody who thinks zoom in, zoom out.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So you're doing it. You're doing it all. You got. In fact, with the new robots, you got. There's a picture that it's funny. Way before robots, okay, there was a slide to describe, and I can't remember who put it up there, and I used it later, but I didn't come up with it. This is a perfect laparoscopic surgeon. And it was a picture of a guy with 3 or 4 hands. Yeah. The surgeon had 3 or 4 hands. And so now you have, 3 or 4 hands. You can control everything. And that's what really you want to do. So.
Well, what I found is it exposes, teaching on the robot exposes weaknesses that otherwise may not have been there because you are controlling your own retraction. And so when the residents set up their retraction, the thing that I find robotically that I didn't catch as much whenever I was holding, 2 of the sticks for a lap chole, you're watching them do a robot chole, when they're retracting, it exposes this poor left hand. Like it's like the times when they're like struggling, and I'm going, that's because your left hand has been sitting completely still for the past 5 minutes. I'm trying to tell them, it's like your left hand's doing the case if you're a right-handed surgeon.
I was very fortunate in the early days. This is going back to 1989, 1990, when lap chole first started. Mm-hmm. If you look at the original people who did lap chole, nobody was using their left hand. Almost nobody. Mm-hmm. One guy was, and that was the guy who I was lucky enough to hook up with at my first pig course, and that's Joe Peatland. Everybody else was teaching, you hold the camera in one hand and operate, and the assistant is the left hand.
Yeah.
And Joe Peatland said, and this is back in 1989, he said, no, you learn to operate just like you do open, and you use both your damn hands. Mm-hmm. And I it's funny because Joe and I are very close now, and I tell him, he's also unfortunately old like me and retired, but I tell him all the bad things I've done in life are because of you, Joe, because you were my first mentor in 89. So you're, and he laughs because, he knows we're both pretty good surgeons. But I said, yeah, you're responsible. You were the guy that told me to use that left hand. And that's what you say is exactly right. Even today, if you watch a lot of laparoscopic surgeons, they're not using both their hands like you would when you do an open case.
Right. Yeah.
They're using their right hand, or if they're left-handed, left hand, and they're not doing the retraction. Whereas when I learned to do it, and when I taught others, is you're using both hands, and all the assistant's doing is they're your fixed retractor. You just you take their hand, put it here. Don't move, buddy.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, we it's and then the other thing I've been harping on a lot of our chiefs recently, just trying to, they can get to a case. I'm not worried about that. By that level, they're proficient in that aspect, but it's trying to get them a little bit smoother. And so it's the not having the static retraction. So as you're releasing things, that left hand, you may have a good exposure, and then you release the tension, and then the left hand never moves for the next 2 minutes. And then all of a sudden they're like digging in holes. I'm like, well, that's because the retract, it's a dynamic motion with both hands. And so it's funny because you point out those things and you see it click, and that's actually really rewarding, because then the next time you watch them, you're like, now that was nice, and those types of things. I think as I've come further in my career and gained more confidence in my own abilities, it's a lot easier to see the successes of others and feel good about that.
Yeah, I think what you pointed out earlier is you don't learn as much from your successes. You learn from the things you did wrong, and not to do those. It's sort of like, hopefully the Michigan quarterback next year is going to learn from the mistakes he made over the middle this year. We'll see.
Yeah.
But I think you learn. There's nothing like experience and having tough cases and learning. But I think the other thing that I want to bring up is that you've got to learn to admit if you were wrong about something. And I think that I pride myself that that's one thing I've been able to do. I've been able to, if I may have said something 5 years ago, but if I've learned something in the interim, I'm willing to admit I was wrong and change what I do, like about robotics or other things. And it's that ability to change and admit you're wrong and not stick to anything that I think is important. To stress, because things are evolving, things are changing. I think one of the things you talked about, big scrotal hernias in the past, and when some people came up with the idea, when Vaughn up at NYU, or he was in Portland, Napoleon and Malcher came up with the idea of abandoning the sac. Everybody started going, "That's crazy," and I said, "No, that's probably, I never thought of that." Because I was one who dug out every huge scrotal hernias that were down to the knees. I was wrong. There is a technique where you, I think, abandon the sac is an important variation, not for every case.
Correct.
But for big scrotal hernias, it makes total sense, especially when you think about when you do an open hernia. You always abandon the sac. Not always, but a big scrotal hernia, if you do an open technique, what you do is you cut it, tie off the proximal sac, and leave the distal one open. So why not laparoscopically? It's the same thing.
Yeah, I will say I wasn't going to mention that in this episode of the podcast. I wasn't sure your opinion on that aspect, but I have.
You can mention anything.
But I was like, I don't want to get tarred and feathered. But no, I did that. The first time I abandoned the sac was actually before the one of the more recent papers came out about the two different techniques, about like the keyhole or the donut, and I actually was doing. I had a patient that I needed to do this big inguinal scrotal, but he had a lot of heart issues and he was very, very symptomatic. And so what I did is I talked it over with my partner beforehand, and I was just like, this guy, I got to get this guy off the table and get him off the table quickly. And I can't remember exactly what, I don't remember why, but I was going to do it robotic. And so I went in and we had considered just doing it open under local. We had gone through all the iterations of it. So I went in and I just went to the internal ring, made my incision, dropped it back, sewed it closed, did a repair, and put a scrotal support on him. And that guy started his heparin drip back like real quick after surgery, just like 2 or 3 hours after surgery. And went to see him the next day. He had like zero pain, like had the most amazing recovery. And I went and told a partner, I said, I did this as almost like a bailout maneuver just to try to get this guy to where he wasn't having these, I think he was having like obstructive type symptoms and things. I was like, I did this as a bailout maneuver. He looks better than the guys that I'm doing the whole thing on. And so we did that, and we actually kept a list for quite a while. We kept a list of all of them that we did it on, and we'll have the moment where get that data out there. But it was something that I'll tell you, my experiences has been very, very good in the right patient. Then the one thing that I think you'll really appreciate, though, is the thing that I tell people. I was talking to one of our other partners about this. I said, if you do it, though, you have to pull that sac from the side and get the cord lipoma out. I said,
that's you can't abandon a step here,
Exactly. Yeah.
No matter which technique you get, rule 10,
exactly.
You got to do that. But yeah, I think it's funny that to hear people who were jumping on against what those people were preaching, and I'm going, why? In fact, one of the we'll see what happens with my session in August. But I've invited someone because my session is the following the steps, and I'm having someone try to show that as one of this is that it doesn't violate the steps, and we'll see. It has to get approved before it goes forward. But yeah, I think there are things like that. There's certain things that I'm still very much against, if you want to know those. And I would jump on you. And that is, I don't think you need to try and close a direct. There are all these guys who are trying to put stitches to close a direct floor. There is no, I've done somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 hernias. I've never closed a direct floor. There's no reason to close a direct floor. And there's a tremendous risk of trapping nerves when you close the direct floor. So I don't see the sense of it. If you want to grab the sac and pull it out like Jorge does or a few other people, fine, that will decrease seromas. But I've probably aspirated more seromas than any other human being today since I've been doing hernias for 30 years and doing big scrotal hernias. I got my share of scrotal seromas. And so they would come back to the office every week or 2 weeks or every month and put a needle in and suck it under local and they all disappear. The key is if you allow a seroma to exist for more than 3 to 6 months without aspirating and do something about it, will become a contained seroma or like a hydrocele. So you can't you have to either you can watch it disappear, but if it's not disappearing and you leave it, I can guarantee you it will become encapsulated, and then the person will have an extra testicle.
Yes,
which they don't like. They don't think an extra one is better.
No. I will tell you though, I have some people I know that they intervene on seromas at like the first post-operative visit. I usually don't. I wait. No. I give it because I've found that if I wait, and I'm not saying wait a year, but if you wait, like I will see those people back every few weeks until make sure it's getting smaller. But vast majority of them, I've had to intervene on very, very few. If you give them, 2-3 months, they'll usually go away. And if they aren't, then you got to do something. But if they're going to get smaller.
My philosophy was that if they come back and they have a seroma, I tell them it's not a recurrence, it's fluid. If you want, I can show you by sticking a needle in it, but it's probably going to disappear. If it doesn't bother you because it's not painful, then just leave it and we'll watch it for 3 to 4 weeks and see what happens. But I totally agree with you. But I think that if you leave it more than a few months and if it's disappearing, that's the whole thing. When I had David Chen did I had when I was an intern, Nihus did an open repair on my hernia. That's a whole nother story. He kept dropping the weeks before. He kept dropping his glasses into the wound. So those little things that come around and hook on your glasses.
Yeah.
I bought him a pair of those.
Please open them in my groin. Yeah.
But before he did my hernia, I said, "Here, Professor News, please put these on your glasses." He laughed, and he did, and he did my hernia under local as an intern, and I was on ped surgery at the time. Okay. And those days, you were in the hospital for hernia repair. So I stayed overnight. But guess what I had to do in the hospital that night? I had to make rounds on my patients.
Yeah.
That's how bad. So one night, I'm supposed to be post-op, and I'm rounding in the hospital on my patients.
Yeah.
Pediatric service is ridiculous, but getting back to seromas, I don't think you can leave it for more than a few months if it's not disappearing.
Correct.
Because it will encapsulate, and or if the patient complains. I mean,
Sure.
if you do a big enough scrotal hernia, they're all going to get a big fluid collection, and
the ones that actually don't, that I've found, are the ones where I abandon the sac just past the internal ring. Like
it
was funny because we put them in the scrotal support for a couple of weeks and we leave them there. And I can't remember, a couple of patients had other issues. And so they ended up getting scanned for other things. And the fluid that I think would have probably been this seroma is like in the like perivesicular space, in the space of Retzius. There's fluid there, but it's actually not down. I had one.
Well, that's good.
I had one guy that I dissected the whole thing out, and he had no seroma. And he shows up. It's something to do. But anyway, he ended up reaccumulating fluid at a weird time. And I go back in there and I'm going, this is weird. You shouldn't be having fluid like 2-3 weeks after. Like, I don't know what's going on, if there's like a connection or something. Anyway, so I get a CT scan on him and he had fluid all over his belly and he didn't have it when I was there before. And I'm like, this is really weird. I was like, you've got like some ascites going on or something. Mm-hmm. And he wasn't a drinker. And so he had a good heart. And he ended up getting diagnosed with like stage 4 cholangiocarcinoma. And it was all because like the only thing we ever knew is that this guy's fluid showed up in his groin, and I just couldn't figure out like what was going on. And it might have been actually that same patient that I'd done on the anti platelets and on the heparin drip, but it just nothing made sense. And so they came back to me and they were like, we want to thank you so much. You helped him. So I was like, oh, well, Rob. And it's like, yeah, you helped get him diagnosed with cholangiocarcinoma. And I was like, well, that's not really the thanks that I was wanting. But,
you've just proven an old adage: better lucky than smart.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's been my life. Better lucky than smart.
Yeah, I remember I had a case where it was like my first week or second week in private practice in Fresno, and I was covering for my partners, and this patient comes in at nighttime with an acute abdomen, and looked like a perforation of the colon of some kind. And so I went in there, and the patient was scheduled for my partner to do a open chole, and the gynecologist to do some ovarian thing the next week. Mm-hmm. But this patient presents to me, the newbie in town, sicker than heck, in the middle of the night with a perforation of some kind. And I went in there and looked at it, and there was this mass around the appendix. And I said, "This is not appendicitis. This looks like cancer." Because I had been a surgeon. I was a cancer surgeon. I said, "This is cancer. There's something wrong." And I'll never forget I called the pathology to come in and do a frozen in the middle of the night. And the guy looks at me and he goes, a guy named really super Carl Chen. And Carl looked at me and says, "What are you, crazy? What is it? There's nothing." And I said, "Just take it and do it." And he said, "I'm not doing a frozen." He said, so I did a right colon and it turns out that the guy had a carcinoma of the gallbladder metastatic to the cecum.
Eesh.
Which is then perforated on my watch.
Lucky you.
Yeah, that's what. So I was lucky. It's just like, this is crazy, Yeah. This is so. Your case reminds me that sometimes better lucky than smart. But
my case that I was in, that I was like, well, this is really interesting, and I'm really sad that it's mine. I had a guy come in with a mid bowel obstruction. And we couldn't. It wasn't even mid. It was actually like just not far past the ligament or trites, but was obstructed, looked like there was this mass or something, couldn't figure out what was going on. and ended up in the operating room with him. And he turned out he was a patient that was on full everything for Crohn's and was still completely uncontrolled. And he had a gallstone ileus between Crohn's strictures just past his ligament of Treitz. And I'm like going, oh no. And so I'm like, you try to like milk it back, it like won't move. It's like perfectly in between these two strictures. So I was just like, cut it open, pulled the stone out, sewed it closed, said a few, prayers and sent it on. He did fine, and he came back to my office a few months later, and he's like, "You gonna take my gallbladder out?" I was like, "How's your Crohn's?" He's like, "Still really, it's like we can't control it." I was like, "You need to see a hepatobiliary," and I sent him down there, and the hepatobiliary surgeon was like, "Nope, not touching that." So hopefully he's doing okay. But that was a case where in the middle of it's one of those in the middle of the day, where you're just going, "I don't know how I drew this straw." But they did not have this in the textbook whenever I was going through residency.
No, that's what experience is. But how do you think it is now? I mean, one of the things that everybody is doing a fellowship. Almost. Very few people are going out from a general surgery residency and going out in practice.
Yeah.
Do you think it has to do with the time limits on their education? In other words, these shifts. I don't know. I know my son now has to do like 12-hour shifts at night. Totally different than we did. I tell my wife, we never did that. We just we did every second or every third day. We just stayed. Right. We never left. But now they do. With the 80-hour work week supposedly.
Yeah.
Is it they're not getting enough experience, or what's the problem there? Because I think education is really important.
Yeah, so I didn't do a fellowship. I went straight into practice, and really my first few years in practice were probably more of my like on the job fellowship. Right. But I think it's multifactorial from what I've seen, and I can only speak to our program. I think more and more people are going into fellowship from our program, and I don't necessarily think that it's because they can't operate. I think that there are places out there that's probably the case, just because when I was interviewing for residency back in, that would have been 2009, 10. That was whenever I was interviewing for residency. There were places that the residents were very honest, and they just said, like, listen, our case numbers we're getting 800 major cases, but getting a lot of other experience, research and this and that, but really need that last year or two to really solidify our surgical skills. And they were very honest at a few places I interviewed. I think there's marketability in a lot of ways. A lot of the people that go into it are wanting to do things very specific that realistically, I don't think the pathway, at least what I'm seeing, the pathway to be a specialist by being a general surgeon that just does a large volume of it and then eventually becomes that doesn't seem like that's going to be that possible. And I think that I'm probably lucky that I've been able to get into, I'm not a full-time hernia surgeon, but I definitely do a heavy hernia volume. And I think in the future, that's probably going to not be as much the case. I think minimally invasive fellowship trained surgeons are probably going to be more in line for those types of jobs. And so I think there's that. I also think that there's a little bit of the fact that even through the period of my training, and definitely before me, through my training, and even now, I think there's a lot of pressure on like medical legal pressure on the autonomy that we give residents. And so, always being there in the room for me was a huge difference. Like I've said it before on the podcast, but the first time I was doing a lap chole and it came time to cut the cystic duct, and I looked around and there's like nobody else in the room that's going to tell me if it's the common, you're sitting there going like, this is a big deal. And so, but I know that a lot of places, at least whenever I was in medical school and stuff, there's a lot of times that residents were operating with the attending nearby, but not in the room. And so I think that kind of experience was very valuable, but it's not really realistic with some of the pressures that are put on even the teaching faculty, even if you're doing a case and they're getting those numbers. But, and then also I just think everything's getting so specialized.
Things have changed dramatically from I'm an old fart, as we say, from when I trained, because it was actually the second year when I was in the second year of my being an attending at the University of Illinois, that the rules changed. Mm-hmm. And then I left at the third year, fortunately, because the rules would have hurt me. But when I was in training, except for certain cases to learn from, the attendings were not even there.
Mm-hmm.
They would show you how to do a gastrectomy and do some with you, but you and the chief resident were doing the cases.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had tremendous amount of experience. I think the biggest thing for me was, and my boss, Dr. Dasgupta, when I as a surgical oncologist, said that first year for me being an attending, in other words, I went from chief resident at the University of Illinois to the attending running basically the county oncology service, doing commandos, head and neck stuff, Whipples, 4-quarter resections, hemipelvic, all kinds of major stuff. Is exactly what you said. Is I no longer had someone to look back at. I was it.
Yeah.
I had to make the decision. So that is the toughest transition, and I think it's even for someone who has a fellowship, it's that first year afterwards that is the scariest year, because unless they're like you are at a university and there's a bunch of guys, you can call someone more
Mm-hmm.
senior, and I see that happening at universities. That it's funny. I used to do a lot of medical legal stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and stuff that I would do the whole case. I mean, I had a case where, the guy at UCSF sees, well, there's something goofy with the colon, so they call a colorectal surgeon in.
Mm-hmm.
We never did that. We just did it all.
Sure.
And I think that it's that first year or second year, but hopefully only the first year, where you don't have Luke behind you or next to you, or Luke on the phone
Mm-hmm.
to say, what do I do now? And that's the advantage, I think, of being not out in the real world, but at a university. You can always, you call a partner or call someone else to come to the room and give you another opinion. But when you have your residents finish and they go back to Oklahoma, and they're in a small town and they're doing the surgery, there ain't nobody else.
No. It's the importance of partners when you come out, no matter what your training is that first year, the importance of the group you join and the partners you have, I think really sets you up for success or struggle early in your career. That transition from residency into being an attending was so difficult for me that's actually something that I'm really passionate about. And I think one of the main, and realistically, this podcast is a spinoff of that passion, in the fact that one of the things that I experienced very strongly is whenever I got out and I had those moments of doubt, and I was in a situation in my first year or two, or for me, it was longer than that. My learning curve on things, my perception of my learning curve has always been longer than normal. I think the reality is probably that I just am so much of a perfectionist that, it extends in my mind. But whenever I came out, there was a level of feeling lack of confidence that I never saw any of my other attendings express. And so whenever I was experiencing that and I realized it, for me, it made me question my competence. Whereas it was more probably a natural transition, that fear, that looking over your shoulder and go like, nobody's here. Am I doing the right thing? Man, this is a lot of pressure. Or heaven forbid you have your first complication, and then that really shakes you for a minute, And those are the situations that I think are normal and part of the growth process, at least in my opinion. But I don't think people were talking about it openly and talking about how difficult it was. And one of the reasons that I say that is because I can remember very vividly when the people that never expressed it did express something about like losing sleep over a complication or this or that. It was so rare that it jarred me, and I remember those vividly. But I've been very, very open with my residents and my trainees about my own struggles, about for instance, like this month it's been, I told them all, I was like, listen, I've been a little bit short. We've been waiting on a biopsy result off of a tumor off my wife's knee for the past 8 days. And so, luckily it came back this morning benign, but to say that life doesn't affect you in your career, and that we're some sort of like able to completely compartmentalize and able to come out of training, even if you do a fellowship, completely confident, and it put that and not express that that's not a lot of people's experience. There are some people that I'm sure feel that way, but that definitely wasn't mine. I think it underestimates how hard it is in that transition. And I think that's one of the reasons why people maybe go to fellowship more frequently, is because they don't understand that some of this stuff is actually normal. You're not like failing or abnormal. It's just nobody was talking about it.
No, I get what you're saying entirely. And I worry about the surgeon who doesn't take to heart and doesn't worry. That if someone asked me, now that I'm retired, and I wish I wasn't, but because operating is like to me, I liken it to a football player. When it's over, you don't know what to do unless you become a broadcaster. And so maybe I should become a surgical broadcaster.
That's your first gig right here.
Yeah, but I can remember every case that didn't do well and learn from everyone. I worry about the surgeon. I've seen surgeons they're very cavalier. There's a thing, people will do something crazy and they say, "Well, I got away with it," and I went, "No, you didn't get away with it. The patient did." Yeah. I can now sleep better at night. That's the only thing that's about retirement that's been good. Mm-hmm. I mean, I did some pretty hairy, complicated cases, especially in my previous life, and then when I was semi-retired, in quotes, working 3 or 4 days a week, doing complicated bariatric stuff. I would worry every night when I would do some ridiculous case and not sleep. Yeah. Now I don't. I still dream about them, unfortunately, but I don't. Wake up and very often thinking about what's this patient doing. I mean, and so I worry about the surgeon that doesn't take that to heart. That is important to feel inside you. Those people are family when you operate, mm-hmm. and they're trusting you. You should be objective, but you have to feel about it. I mean, I'm totally with you, and I worry about those surgeons, and there are plenty of them out there that don't have that sense. They are just, I don't know what even the word would be, but they're just operating, and if something goes wrong, oh, well, that's just the way things. No, that's not the way things are. Mm-hmm. And so, I think what you say is very true. I don't know if I'm babbling at this point, but it means a lot to me that as the person cares about their patients and cares about if there's something goes wrong, because you're responsible.
Yeah, I've had really some conversations with people who I would have categorized exactly what you're talking about, that don't care. And then I've had some conversations with them that, I really, truly, a couple of them, I went out on a limb and kind of expressed to them that I was struggling with some ruminating about some complications. And then they open up about the fact that, they were losing sleep, or that this was like destroying their well-being. And I'm going, it was shocking to me, because I never pegged them for that kind of deal. And I almost wanted to say, like, you should probably express that sometime, because the opinion of like bystanders is that you don't give a crap at all, And so it's kind of one of those deals where I don't know if it's because they don't care, or maybe they just don't express it the same way that I do. There's possibly, I'm definitely not saying there aren't people out there that are probably more on the spectrum. I see a lot of people blame patients for the complications, where I'm just like, ultimately that was you. But my biggest pet peeve, and I am always harping on this with the residents, is you hear people say, well, it's not malpractice. The gap between good quality work and malpractice is so enormous that if you're basing your quality on not getting sued, there's a whole lot of help and benefits that you could give to people that you're really leaving on the table. And so I always tell them, like, you should be practicing not just to not get sued. Like that's I mean, if you're doing the right thing, stuff happens, and stuff happens outside of our control, and listen, it's bound to happen. But if your bare minimum is just not getting into a lawsuit, then I think that you're maybe leaving a lot of quality on the table.
Yeah, but there's even another problem with that, is when you're doing things just to not get sued, you're not. There are certain times when it pays to take risk.
Yes.
Okay, and then you weigh the risk versus the benefit, and I talk about that a lot. And so if you never are willing to take certain risks, because then you're going to leave a lot of benefit on the table.
Yeah.
And you're going to leave a lot of people, and that was very true for me, not so much in with hernia or bariatrics, well, except the complicated bariatrics, the revision stuff, as it was with cancer surgery. I mean, you sometimes have to take calculated risk, but it's the risk versus the benefit. You don't want to take a risk if the benefit doesn't outweigh that risk. So I think, you can't just be a defensive. I mean, I hear that, as you say, but I'm not going to do that because that could be someone. If you have good reasoning to do something and it's a proper thing, then sometimes you have to do it, even though it's not. But that doesn't mean doing crazy things, and going back to hernia, for example, just because you can do it doesn't mean it's the right thing to do.
Correct.
And for example, and I don't know how you put this, but patients post radiation for prostate CA, you're probably I have been roped into too many times going back laparoscopically and doing their hernia when they've had radiation. Mm-hmm. And every time it happened, and the last one I can still remember because it was my anesthesiologist's father. Mm-hmm. And I almost wanted to kill my anesthesiologist after. He says, why did you make me do this? it would have been better off with an open under local hernia repair. Even though I don't think that's a better operation, mm-hmm. You take the risk. 8 out of 10 times I can get away with doing it laparoscopically. But why should I take the risk of injuring two people? Now, I think the opposite is true for someone who's had a previous laparoscopic repair. I think, personally, every one of those patients should be at least re-laparoscoped tap-wise and look to see why it recurred. Especially if it's your case.
Yep.
Especially if it's your case. Yeah. And then my feeling is, if you're good enough, like I'm not saying I'm the greatest surgeon in the world, but I mean, I can do almost any recurrent, or could, not anymore, but could do recurrent laparoscopic hernias, refix them laparoscopically. Yeah. But I would say to the person who doesn't have that skill level, they should at least put a 5 trocar in and look. Mm-hmm. And see, because you're going to see why it recurred.
Yeah.
Whereas if you go open, you're never going to know.
I agree.
And if it's your own case, yep. You're not going to learn from it.
Yeah, it bothers me. Yeah.
If you put a 5 scope in and you say, "Oh, the mesh rolled up," there, as I put it, could be lateral roll up, medial roll up, total roll up, whatever. I forgot the lipoma. At least you'll know. But if you go anteriorly right away, first of all, I don't think the repair is going to be as good. It could be. People are, maybe David Chen will argue with me, but I think you won't know why it recurred. So I think it's, you should take a peek, and at least look. And if you're good enough,
go for
it. Go for it. But if you're not good enough, then don't. But I would say the opposite is true. And I've done enough with radiation or previous radical prostates. It's not. You can do it. Mm-hmm. And there are people publishing huge series about doing it. But for the average surgeon, should they be doing it? No.
Yeah.
The answer is no.
Yeah. Yeah, that is one that my partners and I discuss not infrequently. I still fall on the, if you've had a prostatectomy, I still do them open.
Nothing wrong
localized with radiation, I'll still give it a shot robotic, but I had a patient with total pelvic radiation, and even tried to do that open, and even that was hard. That was a big mess. But Yeah, no, those cases would be tough, and I completely understand what you're saying. There's been a couple of recurrences that I've had that I've taken back and done an open repair after having previously done a robotic or a laparoscopic repair, and it eats at me not knowing exactly. I have a good suspicion. I have a very, very strong suspicion, and I did modify one of the things I was doing to make sure that didn't happen, and luckily it hasn't happened again. Knock on wood, but yeah, I think that's a really good tidbit. As we get to the end of
let me tell you one more personal story about hernia in a way. Okay, I unfortunately at the beginning of COVID I got my own prostate cancer. Okay, so I went up to I shopped around. I called all the intuitive people and see who they thought the best robotic prostate surgeon was, and they gave me a list of 4 or 5. One of them was actually down where you are, but the other one was the UCSF. So I went up there and I said to the guy, I said, I've had bilateral posterior recurrent hernias fixed laparoscopically, and I have mesh on both sides. I said, I don't think you're going to be able to do the obturator or deep inguinal, nodes because my mesh is there. And the guy, very good surgeon, world famous surgeon, he goes, "Oh, I've done many of these at UCSF. That mesh is never a problem." I said, "Okay." So I went ahead and had my radical prostate done. And after he says, I couldn't do the nodes. Your mesh was all the way down, covering the obturator fossa.
Yeah.
I said, yeah, that's where it's supposed to be.
Right, yeah.
And so we've never done it. This is now 6 years ago. We were going to collaborate because what he was saying is most of the people he sees at a prestigious university, I don't know whether they're coming from outside or where, but their mesh is nowhere near where it's supposed to be.
Sure.
He as a urologist had no idea where it was supposed to be. He just knew that when these people come with inguinal hernia repairs posteriorly with mesh in, they're not a problem.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people out there not doing it right.
I had this exact conversation with our urologist who's very, very skilled and he has a lot of experience. Literally a month ago, he came to me and he sent me a patient. He goes, this patient has bilateral recurrent direct inguinal hernias after I took his prostate out. And I go, okay, that's fine. Send him over. I'll take care of it. And he goes, man, I don't know what the hell that surgeon was doing. He goes, there was mesh all the way to the pubic symphysis.
To the pubic.
Yeah. And I go, right. And he goes,
it's supposed to be past the pubic symphysis.
He goes, I don't know. He goes, it was mesh. He's like the whole pelvic floor was covered in mesh. He goes, and I go, yeah. And he goes, well, I mean, what was he doing? I go, he was doing an actual repair of an inguinal hernia. And it was funny because he was just like, no, it's usually all just a little tiny piece over there by the cord. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's a lot of them.
So here's a study for you, okay? I didn't do it. You should do it. Is combine with your urologist who does the robotics and have him do a series of taking pictures of the hernias and what percent of the ones he sees he won't know if it's supposed to be in the right place. Sure. But you will be if he takes the picture. And I think that's worth publishing because someone needs to get out there that there's a whole group of people doing hernias that aren't even coming close to the first 9 commandments, let alone the 10th.
Yeah.
They're not putting a 10 by 15 mesh in there. They're not going 3 centimeters below the pubis, and they're not covering the space of rest. They're not doing it right. And then that number is much more than you or I think.
Oh,
in other words, the number of incorrect hernias.
Well, did a 15-minute bilateral inguinal hernia. I'm like, but did you do it well? That's the question, right? I can do a lot of things really quickly. It may not be very good.
7 minutes aside, I can't do that. That's
some of the stuff.
That's like running the 100 yards in less than 10. I can't do that either.
Yeah. Well, at the end of every episode, we offer people their opportunity to give their hernia hot take. Now, you've had a lot of takes throughout the episode already, but if you have one stored up for us, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, the only hot take I would take is that hernia repair, whether it's inguinal or ventral, is totally unappreciated by our insurance colleagues. I mean, it's an interesting, I don't know if you know the fact that when they came out with a code for laparoscopic inguinal hernia repair, because the patients did so much better, could get back to work 2 days later, or ride, my patients who were bicycle enthusiasts and racers could go back to riding the bike the next few days, that we shouldn't charge as much. And therefore, the code for laparoscopic inguinal hernia repair pays less than open.
Yes.
And the same, I bet you, is true for ventral hernia repairs. So that's my complaint, is that somebody needs to get to the insurance people and say, how about you? Would you rather be on the table and get this or that? So,
yeah. Well, I think that is a hernia hot take that's going to be appreciated and felt by the majority of us out there doing this. It is, and unfortunately, at the moment, it doesn't feel like it's getting better or easier. It feels like it's getting a little bit worse here recently. So hopefully, we can kind of make some progress. But
yeah.
Again, sir, we really appreciate you coming on. It's been a fantastic conversation. I've been looking forward to it for a while, so I'm just so glad you took the time to talk with us.
Yeah, I hope to see you at American Hernia Society in Denver. You ought to come. I'm only going to be there one day because I have to leave for Japan the next day. But
we'll be there, and I think
look for me there.
I think we may even have a Hernia Gods podcast presence there. Maybe have a booth to get some on the spot hot takes. So
you should, if I could add one other thing, if you want, is you should hook this up, your podcast, somehow hook it up with General Surgery News.
Yeah,
they would love that. I will talk to them and see if I can hook, because I'm as one of the editors there. I think what you're doing is really nice, and maybe you could somehow combine it with them.
I'd love it
in some way.
Yeah, I'm all about trying to get the word out there, because I think that we have as surgeons, we have a lot more shared experience than I think we realize. And a lot of the things that make this job rewarding can also be very challenging. And it's a lot easier to handle it if you know that you're not alone.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. It's been a fun pleasure.
Absolutely. Well, we appreciate it. This will be the wrapping up this episode of the Hernia Gods Podcast. This is your mere mortal host, Luke, signing off. Thank you all so much.